Zimbabwe.
Good morning.
Morning.
So today I'm going to talk about African Pentecostalism, Pentecostal missionaries, and the need to understand African traditional religion.
What's the problem?
Sure. So over the last few decades, there's been a rapid rise in Pentecostal churches across sub-Saharan Africa, a testimony that Christianity is thriving in that region. For example, in Zimbabwe, of the people who identify as religious, more than 50% are Pentecostals, and many observers have said that Africa could be the future of Pentecostalism. But however, there is a major concern because while Pentecostalism is rising, African traditional religion practices remain very strong in many parts of Africa and offers a real challenge to missionary work. And in defiance against Pentecostal criticism, African societies have held on to traditional beliefs, and this often comes across as a problem to missionaries who harshly criticize African traditional religion and have been calling for a complete wipe out of the belief. And also African pastors have joined this bandwagon in attacking African traditional religion, and mainly because of colonization, I guess. It has created this inferiority complex in Africa that Africans need to abandon their culture and philosophy and adopt Western philosophy. So I thought it would be helpful to start by talking about the origins of African traditional religion. And before the arrival of missionaries, Africans had a vibrant religion and a distinct philosophy on life. Their religious beliefs evolved slowly through many centuries as people responded to many life situations that were reflected upon their experiences. And many factors could have influenced the development of their belief. For example, the geographical environment, powers of nature, calamities, epidemics, life and death, and so on. And these religious beliefs, these religious ideas and practices arose and took shape in the process of many search for answers to many philosophical questions. And perplexed by the complexity of the universe, Africans came to believe that there was a supernatural power behind its creation. And the belief was then passed from generation to generation. It is still alive today in many parts of Africa. The belief is part of the cultural heritage in Africa. It has dominated and shaped the culture, social life, economic life, political organization of African societies. And the belief is mainly concerned about topics like spiritual life, human life, the problem of evil and suffering, life and death. And some of these topics actually overlap with Pentecostalism or Christianity in general. So I believe that there's a need for a dialogue between the two beliefs, and a strong Pentecostal church can be built on some of these aspects of African traditional religion. So I think modern missionaries could learn from the past, and key lessons can be drawn from the history of early missionaries. When early European missionaries came to Africa, they came with misconceptions and prejudices against Africans, and they downgraded and demonized the traditional beliefs they found. And they thought of Africans as pagans, evil, heathens, and that they needed to be enlightened by Christianity. And because of this, they were doomed to fail. They preached about the superiority of Christianity and dismissed the African traditional religion as a primitive religion. And some even doubted that Africans could be philosophical. As one missionary said, Africans get to know God because the idea is philosophical, but to the contrary, the belief in God has been in Africa before the arrival of missionaries. That is why in every African language there's a word for God. For example, in Zimbabwe we call him Mwari. In Botswana they call him Modimo. In Swahili, Kenya, they call it Mungu. In Ghana, they call it Mau. And many Africans felt insulted by these prejudices of early missionaries, and that mentality still exists today. So if one were to go to Africa as a missionary, I would advise to avoid using pejorative or derogatory language when describing this religion. So in post-colonial Africa, African traditional religion is very strong. And while people converted to Christianity, they still keep their traditional beliefs. So it is very important for anyone interested in doing missionary activities in Africa to have a deep understanding of the dynamic relationship between African people and their traditional beliefs. Going to Africa and demonizing traditional beliefs, I don't think is a key to successful missionary work, because it leads to hostility and rejection. And some aspects of African traditional religion could be embraced because they provide a platform upon which a church could be launched or transformed to fit in with the African needs. So, many Africans don't see their religion as inferior to anything. They see many similarities between Christianity and their belief, and they feel that African traditional religion represents the African culture and identity. And therefore, missionaries should find ways to harness some aspects of African traditional religion to build a Christian church. In that way, illusion is to be dispelled, suspicion removed, and conflict minimized. So this picture is one of African traditional fractional. And actually, this picture is drinking some really poisonous stuff. I think like snakes crushed in there. There's battery acid and gunpowder. I actually have a friend. Yeah. I have a friend who goes here and drink that stuff and is walking around. So that just shows how powerful their belief is. I'm sure some Christians are terrified to drink that.
So innocent, is this like communion?
This is some kind of ritual.
I mean, does everybody go around and have some of it?
Yeah. So African traditional religion is founded on the belief in the supreme God. And a common misconception from people is that African traditional religion believes in small gods. For example, in high school, I remember when we were in school, we were being taught that the African traditional religion God should be written by a small g, and the Christian God should be written with a capital G. And that influences how people think. But when I actually look closely, the same God. So they do not worship idols, although they may use such objects like dolls when performing rituals. So one distinct aspect of African traditional religion is this ancestor veneration, and most people call it ancestor worship, but that's not quite correct. So they believe that God is unapproachable by the individual, therefore there's a need for an intermediary between God and people. To communicate with God, they practice necromancy, which is worshiping through their own ancestors. And these ancestors are highly respected family members who act as intermediaries between God and people. And we believe that ancestors are part of the family elders with enhanced powers to bless, protect, or punish. And they are a symbol of peace. So at many ceremonies, gatherings, and rituals, the first thing is usually to invite the ancestors. And to invite the ancestors, they usually use alcohol. So the picture on the left is like a traditional beer or something. But now, because of the new fancy alcohol, now use some dry gin. Another key aspect of African traditional religion that overlaps with Christianity is the belief in life after death. And the fact that Africans share a common belief with Christianity in life after death is an opportunity for missionaries to bring those people to the Christian church. But I think there's a little bit of a flaw in the African traditional religion, and this flaw is that they believe that they have the powers to ritually invite dead people to come back and live with them, which I don't think, as human beings, we have the capacity to do those things, and they made some reform in that sense. So another thing missionaries might encounter in Africa is witch doctors. And the witch doctors are equivalent to prophets in Pentecostal churches. So the picture on the left is the traditional healer, and the one on the right is the Pentecostal faith healer. And as you can see in the picture, there's some little bit of similarities. So people are actually using some aspects of African traditional religion in Pentecostalism. And when missionaries came to Africa and see that, they think it's strange and weird. But it's working. So these prophets and faith healers have the power to diagnose diseases, heal the sick, and do prophecy. But the only difference is that the witch doctors don't operate by the Holy Spirit. They believe in the knowledge they claim to have received from their ancestors and their deep understanding on how to manipulate the power of nature like plants to solve problems. So in terms of emergency, like sickness, death, the witch doctors are the first one to be consulted. But despite many similarities, Pentecostals have dismissed witch doctors as demons, and I think that they can easily blend in with Pentecostal doctrines. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. We have time for a few questions for Innocent. Does anyone have a question on this?
So this idea that there's life after death, was that before African people, you're from Zimbabwe?
Yes.
Had that feeling before Christianity came, or is this something that life after death was thought of only after Christian missionaries came to Africa?
It was thought before missionary came.
All right. So why don't you think that people who die can come back and live with families?
But why don't I think like that? I think it goes back to the Christian belief that not everyone who dies goes to God's kingdom. I think some people just perish or go to hell. So I think there's a little bit of flaw in that regard in the African traditional belief.
So there is life after death. What are the traditional thoughts about where that person goes?
They assume that everyone goes to some spiritual world, and then they have the powers to ritually invite them back. They just go to the grave and do some rituals like come back and live with us and join the family.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Questions or comments?
I'm a surgeon that works for MSF Medicine, Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and we see most patients go to traditional healers before they come to Western medications. And I don't understand what the traditional healer, what does he get out of it? Is he paid, or what happens?
So I think most of them actually charge some bit of tokens, like money. So yeah, patients have to pay.
I don't think I've ever seen a Pentecostal healer, but I suppose, is that a much smaller number of people that are Pentecostal healers, or is it about the same, or what? I see an awful lot of traditional healers, but I mean, that was one of the problems with the Ebola crisis, is that they went to the traditional healer, and then it just spread, because part of it is that it's the hands-on part of it, which is very important. And it turned out that that was a bad move, because that spread the disease very quickly. Is there an equal number of Pentecostal and traditional healers, or is it very small percentage?
Actually, because of the, in some society, because of the persecution of the faith healers, they usually do the thing in secrecy. But Pentecostal faith healers, I think, are increasing in number. So I think they're about the same.
Well, that concludes our time. Thank you, Innocent, and thank you all for your questions.